Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most important leaders of the American civil rights movement. That was the effort to extend equal rights to all people, regardless of race. In the first half of the 20th century, that was a controversial idea. In many parts of the country, African Americans were barred from participating in ordinary life. They could not eat at the same lunch tables, go to the same schools, or even use the same bathrooms as white people. This practice of separating African Americans from white people was called segregation. In the South, segregation was forced by Jim Crow laws. They made it illegal for African Americans to mix with whites. The police backed behavior too. African Americans had to live in separate neighborhoods, hold specific jobs, and talk to whites with the utmost respect. Try to fight it, and you lose the jail time, injury, even death. There were no Jim Crow laws up north, but unspoken rules still kept African Americans apart. In many places, white homeowners would only sell their houses to other white people. This informal code ensured that African Americans remained second-class citizens. Martin Luther King grew up in the midst of all that inequality, so he made it better for today. As we look to honor Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy on January 17, it is important to remember that he was more than just a civil rights activist. He was a man of faith, a husband, and a strategic visionary. Looking at Martin Luther King Jr.'s life cannot be defined or represented by just examining the civil rights era. From his childhood in Georgia to falling in love with Coretta Scott King while working on his doctorate in Boston, this showed a picture of a man who changed the face of America.
So, when was he born? Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, the second child of Martin Luther King Sr., a pastor, and Alberta Williams King, a former school teacher. He grew up in the city's West Auburn neighborhood with his older sister, Christine, and younger brother, Alfred Daniel Williams, which at the time was home to some of the country's most famous and wealthiest African Americans. Moreover, he was a talented student who attended segregated public schools and was accepted to Morehouse College, the former school of both his father and maternal grandfather, when he was 15 years old, in which he studied medicine and law. Despite his initial hesitation to follow in his father's footsteps and enter the ministry, he changed his mind under the influence of Morehouse president Dr. Benjamin Mays, an influential philosopher and outspoken campaigner for racial equality. He entered Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania after graduating in 1948, where he obtained a Bachelor of Divinity degree. He was awarded a prestigious fellowship and was voted president of his predominantly white senior class. King then enrolled in a graduate program at Boston University, completing his coursework in 1953 and earning a doctorate in systematic theology 2 years later. While in Boston, he met Coretta Scott, a young singer from Alabama, who was studying at the New England Conservatory of Music. The couple wed in 1953 and settled in Montgomery, Alabama, where King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Now, the Kings had 4 children: Yolanda Denise King, Martin Luther King III, Dexter Scott King, and Bernice Albertine King. It is often said that one of the greatest ways to honor the past is to be mindful of the sacrifices made for our current civil liberties. If movies are your way of commemorating, we're here to help you in remembrance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The Boy King 1986, directed by Billy J. Parrott, highlights a part of King's life that is rarely showcased, his childhood. This drama shares some of the early forms of discrimination that King encountered and how it shaped him for his future. It shows how the loving and nurturing home environment that he was cultivated in shaped his ideology.
You better not be coming around here again.
Did I do something wrong?
I don't want you playing with my boys anymore. I know you all been friends for a while, but that's over now. So you go on home right now.
But all I want to do is play some ball. But I still want to play too, ML.
You hush up your mouth right now and get back into the store.
But Mama...
Did you hear what I said? Listen, ML. I've tried to be as nice as I could be, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. But you know how things are. My boys are white, and you ain't. And you're getting too big to be playing together. And I just can't have my sons being best friends with a colored boy. I just can't. So you run along home and don't come back here no more.
The King family had been living in Montgomery for less than a year when the highly segregated city became the epicenter of the burgeoning struggle for civil rights in America, galvanized by the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision of 1954. On the 1st December 1955, Rosa Parks, secretary of the local chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, refused to give up her seat to white passenger on the Montgomery bus and was arrested. Activists coordinated a bus boycott that would continue for 381 days. The Montgomery bus boycott placed a severe economic strain on the public transit system and downtown business owners. They chose Martin Luther King Jr. as the protest leader and official spokesman. By the time the Supreme Court ruled segregated seating on the public bus unconstitutional in November 1956, King, heavily influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and the activist Bayard Rustin, had entered the national spotlight as an inspirational proponent of organized, nonviolent resistance. The King had also become a target for white supremacists who firebombed his family home that January. On September 20, 1958, Isola Ware Curry walked into a Harlem department store where King was signing books and asked, "Are you Martin Luther King?" When he replied yes, she stabbed him in the chest with a knife. King survived. An attempt assassination only reinforced his dedication to nonviolence. The experience of these last few days have deepened my faith in the relevance of the spirit of nonviolence. If necessary, social change is peacefully to take place.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In 1957, King and other civil rights activists found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, a group dedicated to gaining full equality for African Americans with nonviolent protests. Inspired by the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, the SCLC motto was, "Not one hair of one head of one person should be harmed." King would continue to lead this powerful group until his death. He traveled around the country and around the world as president of the SCLC, giving the lectures on nonviolent protests and civil rights, and meeting with the religious leaders, activists, and political leaders. King met family members and supporters of Gandhi on a long tour in India in 1959, which he described in his book as the guiding light of our technique of nonviolent social change. During this time, King also wrote many books and articles. The letter from Birmingham jail. The Birmingham campaign of 1963 in which activists utilized a boycott sit-ins and marches to protest segregation, unfair hiring practices, and other injustices in one of America's most racially divided cities, put their nonviolence doctrines to the test. While in Birmingham jail, after he was arrested for his involvement of a nonviolent protest against racial segregation, King wrote the letter from Birmingham jail, an eloquent defense of civil disobedience addressed to a group of white clergymen who had criticized his tactics. He defends the civil rights movement's apparent impatience, claiming that without strong actions like his, equal rights for black people would never be complete. King advocated for the widespread practice of peaceful civil disobedience in the face of unjust laws, claiming that human rights must take priority. He stated that one who breaks an unjust law must do it openly, lovingly. Such a person, he claimed, is actually showing respect for the law by insisting on just laws.
Later that year, Martin Luther King Jr. worked with a number of civil rights and religious groups to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was a peaceful political rally which was designed to shed light on the injustices that Black Americans continue to face across the country. March on Washington was held on August 28 and was attended by some 200,000 to 300,000 participants. The event is widely regarded as a watershed moment in the history of the American Civil Rights Movement and a factor in the passage of Civil Rights Act of 1964. The March on Washington culminated in King's most famous speech, known as the I Have a Dream speech. This is a spirited call for peace and equality that many consider a masterpiece of rhetoric. He stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, which is a monument to the president who a century earlier had brought down the institution of slavery in the United States. Lincoln shared his vision of a future in which this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, meaning that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. The speech and march cemented the king's reputation at home and abroad. Later that year, he was named Man of the Year by Time magazine. Moreover, he became the youngest person ever awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. He got this prize because of his nonviolent struggle for civil rights. Receiving this reward was a testament that nonviolence was the best method in achieving peace and equality. In the spring of 1965, King's elevated profile drew international attention to the violence that erupted between white segregationists and peaceful demonstrators in Selma, Alabama, where the SCLC and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, had organized a voter registration campaign. Because of the capture on television, the brutal scene outraged many Americans and inspired supporters from across the country to gather in Alabama and take part in the Selma to Montgomery March, led by King and supported by President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was sent in federal troops to keep the peace. In August, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which guaranteed the right to vote. It was first awarded by 15th Amendment to all African Americans.
Moving on to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Bloody Sunday in 1965, the event in Selma deepened a growing rift between Martin Luther King Jr. and young radical who rejected his nonviolent tactic and commitment to working within the existing political framework. As more militant black leaders such as Stokely Carmichael rose to prominence, King broadened the scope of his activism to address issues such as the Vietnam War and poverty among Americans of all races. In 1967, King and the SCLC embarked on an ambitious program known as the Poor People Campaign, which was to include a massive march on the capital city that addressed the issue on economic justice. The campaign demanded on economic and human rights for poor Americans of diverse backgrounds. A year later, on the evening of 4th April 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. He was fatally shot while standing on the second-floor balcony of a low-rent motel in Memphis, where King had traveled to support a sanitation worker strike. Despite getting an emergency chest surgery, King died at St. Joseph Hospital. King was killed by a guy named James Earl Ray, an escaped convict and known racist. He declared guilty to the murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But within a few days of confessing, Ray began to claim his innocence, arguing that he had been set up, and he gained some unlikely advocates, including members of the King family, before his death in 1998. In the wake of Martin Luther King's death, a wave of riots swept major cities across the country, while President Johnson declared a national day of mourning. Presidential Proclamation 3839 of April 5, 1968 by President Lyndon B. Johnson designated Sunday, April 7, 1968 as a day of national mourning for Martin Luther King Jr. After several years of campaigning by activists, members of Congress, and Coretta Scott King, among others, in 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill creating a U.S. federal holiday in honor of King. On the third Monday of January, Martin Luther King Day was first celebrated in 1986.
To summarize, Martin Luther King Jr. was a social activist and baptized minister who was a significant person in the American civil rights movement from the mid-1950s until his assassination in 1968. Through peaceful protests, King sought equality and human rights for African Americans, the poor, and all victims of injustice. He was a driving force behind watershed events such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the 1963 March on Washington, which helped in the passage of landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 and is honored every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a federal holiday in the United States since 1986.
The questions of this video are: what is The Boy King 1986 movie about? And what are some important activities that Martin Luther King Jr. did? Thanks for watching.